Sarah's house was situated on a quiet street with neighboring houses that were separated by tall wooden fences. The house next door had been empty for almost a year before a man moved in recently. For Sarah, the man who moved in next door always seemed a little off. He never smiled and rarely left his home. The tall, mysterious figure would occasionally peer through his curtains, his dark eyes hauntingly piercing the neighborhood with an unsettling gaze. Sarah had heard rumors about him, whispers of a tragic past that had left him reclusive and withdrawn. Curiosity got the better of Sarah one evening as she watched the stranger from her living room window. His somber demeanor sparked her intrigue, and she couldn't help but wonder what secrets hid behind his closed doors. Determined to uncover the truth, she made it her mission to get to know the enigmatic man next door. Days turned into weeks as Sarah devised a plan to break the ice. She baked a batch of her famous chocolate chip cookies and approached the stranger's house, the scent of freshly baked goods wafting in the air. Knocking on his door, she held her breath, wondering if he would even answer. After what felt like an eternity, the door creaked open, revealing the man's stoic face. His weary eyes studied Sarah with a mixture of surprise and suspicion. "Hi," she said with a warm smile, holding out the plate of cookies. "I'm Sarah, your neighbor from next door. I thought I'd welcome you to the neighborhood." The man regarded her for a moment before accepting the gesture, a faint flicker of gratitude crossing his features. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice raspy and subdued. From that day forward, Sarah made an effort to engage the stranger in conversation whenever their paths crossed. She learned his name was Thomas and that he had indeed experienced a tragic loss. The sudden passing of his wife, Emily. The grief had consumed him, leading him to retreat from the world. Sarah couldn't help but notice peculiar occurrences around Thomas's home. Strange sounds echoed from his basement at odd hours, and flickering lights cast eerie shadows through the curtains. One stormy evening, as thunder rumbled and rain poured, Sarah's concern reached its peak. The unsettling noises from Thomas's house continued at odd hours of the night, and she noticed a strange odor coming from his house. Unable to bear the uncertainty any longer, she ventured next door, knocking urgently on Thomas's door. To her surprise, the door swung open, revealing an unlit hallway. Stepping inside, Sarah's heart raced as she called out Thomas's name. Silence greeted her, broken only by the relentless storm outside. Driven by instinct, she descended the creaky staircase leading to the basement, her breath shallow and her pulse pounding in her ears. The sight that met her eyes chilled her to the bone. The basement was transformed into a macabre chamber, a shrine of haunting memories. Photographs of Emily covered the walls, capturing moments frozen in time. There, in the dimly lit basement, Sarah's eyes fell upon a lifeless figure lying on a makeshift bed, a figure she recognized with a mix of shock and horror. It was Emily, the stranger's late wife. Time seemed to stand still as Sarah's mind struggled to process the grim reality before her. Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as she grasped the enormity of the situation. Fear and disbelief coursed through Sarah's veins. She realized she did not know her neighbor after all. Perhaps she was standing in the basement of a very disturbed man. Sarah's heartbeat increased, and her breathing became shallow. She knew she needed to get out of this house before Thomas realized she discovered his dark secret. As Sarah turned to run towards the staircase, she saw Thomas standing in front of the stairs, blocking her access to escape. His eyes were sunken, his skin was pale, and he had a wild look in his eyes. He began slowly walking towards Sarah, mumbling incoherent words. His head eerily twitched from side to side as if controlled by invisible strings. His unsettling gaze was fixated in Sarah, causing a shiver to run down her spine. Thomas, the neighbor she thought she knew, was now a total stranger to her. Before Sarah could attempt to run from the stranger, he lunged towards her and grabbed her by the throat with both hands. Days turned into weeks, and Sarah was never seen again. Sarah was never seen again. Sarah screamed as Thomas gazed at her with look of nothingness in his eyes. The corners of his mouth turned upwards into a sinister grin as he continued to stare into Sarah's terrified eyes. "I see you've met my wife," the stranger hissed. The grip of his hands around Sarah's neck intensified. Sarah tried to scream, but his hands squeezed tighter, completely cutting off her words. Sarah grabbed the stranger's hands in an attempt to free his hand from her neck, but he only squeezed tighter. Sarah began to kick and fling her body in an attempt to escape his grip, but she was unable to overcome the stranger's strength. The dim basement walls felt as if they were closing in on her as she desperately tried to catch her breath. She began to get dizzy, still desperately fighting for her life. And just like that, the stranger released her, and she fell to the basement floor. Sarah was extremely disoriented, and she was gasping to regain normal breathing. As she lay on the cold basement floor, her eyes slowly turned to look up at the stranger, and then there was darkness. Sarah was never heard from or seen again by her neighbors or loved ones. The stranger's house was now vacant, without a trace of him ever being there. An investigation into Sarah's disappearance ran cold. Not a trace of evidence was found to explain what happened to her. As days turned to weeks, turned into years, the disappearance of Sarah still lingered throughout the neighborhood. On quiet nights, many of the locals claimed to hear strange noises coming from the stranger's former house. Some even claimed to see her ghost wandering through the windows of his abandoned home.